I always hear people describe jiu-jitsu in terms of being like an addiction or in terms of like an obsession. So what was that moment for you where it started to become something where you knew you were going to be doing this the rest of your life?
It's a good question. I think, you know, I fell into jiu-jitsu by accident. It certainly wasn't something that I set out to do, especially when I started in 2001. Nobody really knew what it was. And I lived in Vancouver at the time, so there wasn't a lot of access to it either. I went into jiu-jitsu just wanting to try a different type of physical activity and had no awareness of what it was. I went in, I did my first class, and I thought, it's kind of different. It's neat. I'd like to be able to learn to do what that person's doing. So I just kind of started going. And I grew up wanting to be athletic, but never really excelling at any team sports in high school or grade school or anything for that matter. So what I really enjoyed about jiu-jitsu was it allowed me to be physical. It allowed me to sort of do what I wanted to do and continuously get better at doing it. You know, so I would say probably early on, maybe I had my first competition 6 months into training as a white belt. I would say right about that time was when I decided I'm going to try and train as much as possible and get better. Certainly at the time, it was not a profession, it was just a hobby. So, you know, whatever access I had to it, I took advantage of.
Is it true that you're the first Canadian woman to win at Worlds?
Yes. And I think, I'm not actually sure how many Canadians have won at the World Championships. I think maybe Mark Bocek, maybe. But yeah, I won the, I guess it's how you want to term it. I did win the brown-black division as a brown belt in 2007. That was before the divisions were split. But it's interesting now that there's more people looking into it and writing literature. I'll be classified as a brown belt that won a black belt division as opposed to winning a black belt division. Right. So, yeah. It's all semantics.
When would you say like you kind of reached the point where you're like, the moment where I guess you feel like where you're like, you know, like I'm actually really good at this. Like I can really.
I don't know that I ever really felt that I was very good at it. It's always been an uphill battle in one way or another. Yeah. There's always been something that has made me feel like it's not going to work, I suck, I'm never going to get ahead. Sometimes those things are on the mat, sometimes they're just out there in the world, you know? I think up until the World Championships in 2007, I competed for fun, I competed for the challenge, I just loved getting out there and going at it. I put a lot of unnecessary pressure on myself after winning, and I also had some situational things with my team at the time that also affected my career at that time. But I don't think I ever fought or trained or taught thinking that I was the best or that I'm on another level, because I tell my students even today when they walk in the room, if it's their first day in class and they can't, you know, do the full warm-up, I'll say, listen, I was in your shoes too. Like everybody is in your shoes at one point or another. I've just happened to be doing it a lot longer. So, you know, I guess if you want to talk about a shift, it would probably be a moment when I decided to take a leap of faith and see if I could do this professionally on some level. Because, you know, I think also being a woman in the sport, I've sort of come up with that generation where nobody gave a crap. I mean, some people still don't give a crap about what women do, but I think I was sort of part of that group where we had to break barriers or we had to create opportunities for other females. Because when I started competing, they still had, at the IBJJF tournaments, purple, browns, and blacks used to fight together. There was a time when blues, purple, browns, and blacks all fought together. And as I came into those divisions, they would gradually start to split. So now, the women that go and compete now have all different belt levels, all different weight classes. So I would say that after I won the World Championships, I was provided an opportunity to work within the field of jiu-jitsu, to manage a school, and to take my jiu-jitsu competitive career a little bit more seriously. I was 27 at the time, and I was working in a a corporate white collar job. And I decided, you know what? Maybe I should just take a risk and see how it's going to go, because I was educated in the fine arts, so there's a big side of me that just kind of wants to do what I want to do. But there's another side of me that's also very sort of practical and is like, well, you got to earn a tangible living, and this is, might not make sense. So 2007, 2008 was when I sort of decided, you know what, I'm gonna believe that this is gonna work for me, at least for a few years. And if I don't make anything out of myself by the time I'm 30, I can just go back to doing a corporate thing, But luckily it worked out. Luckily it led me somewhere. So yeah, I mean, but I wouldn't classify that as like, I thought that I was better than everyone. It was just, I had enough experience that I felt like maybe my experiences were of value to somebody else, And I think everything has always been done in that light, even since then, doing camps and seminars and DVDs. I consider it a real honor and a privilege to be able to do those things. I don't necessarily think it's because I have the best jiu-jitsu, but I have skills that I've worked very hard on, teaching and doing jiu-jitsu and whatnot, and I think that's where I sort of see myself.
Do you find yourself looking at, not just looking at jiu-jitsu in terms of like the business of it because you have a school, or like the competition aspect personally, but like as like a, I guess it's like a spectator sport in general? Do you feel like it's growing?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there's more opportunities for fighters to fight in front of audiences. I think there's different promotions that are trying to mix up the rules a little bit to make it more exciting. I mean, I've had a lot of friends over the years who have said, oh, I want to come watch you compete. And I would tell them, no, you don't. They're like, yeah, but I want to come see you win. And I'll be like, no, you don't. It's really boring. You're going to be in a bleacher, super, like your back's going to hurt. The food is awful. It smells. You're going to be there for like 10 hours. I mean, the conditions under which we as athletes fought under in the beginning were pretty like destitute and horrible. And I think things have gotten a lot better for people since then. But that being said, I think without the proper promotions and the proper advocates for jiu-jitsu, you have boring, like jiu-jitsu can be very boring if the rules aren't right. You know what I mean? Like you could have people play to not lose versus play to win. And I think that makes a very big difference. So when you have promotions where maybe there's like money at stake for a submission, or time limits on certain things, or points or awards given to doing certain types of moves, I think that will make jiu-jitsu a little bit more exciting for a spectator. I think people who don't understand jiu-jitsu that come in to watch it are like, what is this weird stuff where, people are just rolling around on the ground? It looks kind of odd. I think it is becoming more exciting now, but I think that's also because those promoters realize the same things I'm talking about.
Do you find yourself spectating, like just kind of in off time? Like, are you watching like Metamora, CPI?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, I think my focus has changed a lot the last few years. I have a young family now. Competition, I've said many times before, is an incredibly selfish venture in jiu-jitsu. Even though you train with a team, it's really just about you. And when you get out there, you have to make sure that you slept, ate, trained properly. You have to manage yourself, or somebody else has to manage you to make sure you're in the best condition possible. That is not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that that's where your focus and that's where your time has to be. I'm in a position now where I have 2 young children, a 2.5-year-old and a 2-month-old. I have a school. I also have a job that I really enjoy that I do from home, as well as running camps and managing seminars. And all of those things combined don't really allow me to focus or think about competition so much. So sometimes I'll catch things on the side, or if I have a subscription to some sort of site, I'll see things, or if I have friends that are fighting, I'll be invested. But to spend most of my time watching matches or watching tournaments, that I cannot do. There's just simply too many matches. And I think the other thing too that I've come up doing is, my husband used to criticize me for this a lot before we were married when we would travel for tournaments. he would be upset if I didn't know who like that athlete was or that celebrity was. And I said, oh, what's the point? I was like, we're just going to go out and fight anyways, you know, like we're all the same, like it's not a big deal. And so I didn't, I guess maybe the right answer is I didn't grow up or I didn't come into jiu-jitsu being a spectator. I came into it just enjoying it and doing it. And that's sort of where my focus has always been. So yeah, I mean, as jiu-jitsu evolves and changes and I get older and I see how much the game is evolving, I go back and I look at these matches or I tune into the World Championships and I'm like, you know, thrilled and amazed that all this stuff can be done now, you know, and it's pretty beautiful to watch when you see it at a high level, but I can't obsess over spectating like some other people do. Though it would be nice.
Did you and your husband like train together? Like how did that start between you two?
We were paired up as training partners. He's actually not that much bigger than me, so, and at the time we were both purple belts, so when I started at Ricardo's, we would always get paired off, and that's how we first met. I call it purple belt love. Almost every couple that I know that like is like a jiu-jitsu couple, like they met training jiu-jitsu and they got married, almost every couple I know was a purple belt couple. That's like I think once you make it into purple belt, it's kind of like, I'm going to stick with it. Versus like white belt, blue belt, sometimes there's a high drop-off rate, you know? But once you're a purple belt, you can look at the other purple belt and be like, you're serious about this, so am I.
Are there any people that like you would get it, like you specifically get excited for like a certain person, like to see them perform?
Most of those people would be people that I probably train with or know. I mean, I have to say, you know, since I became part of Marcelo Garcia's association and under the umbrella of Alianse in 2010, they have an amazing roster of athletes, you know, so I have great respect for my peers and the people that are my teachers and my teammates. But at the same time, you know, you see a lot of these up and coming athletes pushing the envelope all the time, and I think it's awesome to be able to catch glimpses of them as well. But I think I'm the type of person who works from a perspective of enjoying the opportunity to know who I'm watching and having a personal connection to those. You know, I really enjoy having a sense of community. So those are the people that I probably tune into the most, the ones that I know.
I noticed you have kind of I guess kind of a mixed lineage, if you will, when it comes to jiu-jitsu. What happened to make you transition from the Ricardo Almeida, like Renzo Gracie team to Marcelo Garcia?
So my lineage from the very beginning has never been consistent.
Right.
And it wasn't ever an intentional thing. It was always, hey, I'm in my 20s, I'm young, I want to move to New York, I want to move to Japan, I let life dictate where I went. And jiu-jitsu at the time for me was a hobby. And I don't know if it was also because of where I started jiu-jitsu in Vancouver, where there wasn't a lot of access to, you know, black belts, there wasn't a lot of access to big teams. I was never raised learning about the politics of jiu-jitsu. Maybe that was a good thing. Okay, so I received my blue belt under Renzo, but I spent a good majority of that time training in Vancouver under 2 or 3 different instructors at the time. I trained jiu-jitsu for sport, for fun, for community. And when I moved to New York for the summer, I was in art school, and I moved to New York for a summer internship. And when I was in New York, a lot of my teammates in Vancouver were like, oh, I think there's Gracie's there. And I was like, what is that? And they're like, Gracie's, you gotta go train with the Gracie's. And I was like, I don't even understand what that is. And they're like, you know, Renzo, Roger. And I was like, you know, I was very confused. And when I looked it up, there were 2 schools in New York at the time, and one of them was Renzo's. And so I checked it out, and I ended up starting to train there and forged a relationship with them. And this was back before Renzo's became the monster gargantuan, powerhouse that it is today. But I had the privilege of being able to learn from Renzo for a while, and it was awesome. And he gave me my blue belt. After that, I found myself moving back and forth between Vancouver and New York, and then eventually to Japan. And when I moved to Japan, I was given my purple belt by someone named Takashi Ochi, who's under Yuki Nakai, who's also a very, well-known, legendary fighter. And I moved back to North America. I moved back to the East Coast, and that's when I joined up at Ricardo's, or Ricardo's. And that too was sort of where I lived and what made sense in terms of accessibility. I ended up over at their school. I trained with them for the better part of 3 years. And when we went our separate ways, politics. There's a lot of politics in everything that we do. There were a lot of unhealthy team dynamics that I think were unfair, but what is fair in life? And a lot of heartache. I was at a point in my career where I think I should have continued to excel, but I was in an environment where certain people caused me a lot of mental grief, and I didn't believe in myself anymore. I was put down a lot by certain people in that place and time. So when we went our separate ways, I had received my black belt just around the same time, and I ended up going back and training and teaching with some old friends that were under Renzo's umbrella, because Ricardo and Renzo are affiliated, but I had never had sort of these negative experiences being under Renzo. So I went back and taught with them for a little while, but I was sort of on my own for about a year and a half, until I kept running into Marcelo's wife, Tatiana, over and over again. We would run into each other on airplanes. We would run into each other at expos, tournaments. And they had recently moved to New York, moved to Florida, and then come back to New York. And every time she would run into me, she would say, "You should come train with me. I'd love to train with you. I saw you compete. Maybe we could be training partners." And I had no idea who she was. I had no idea who her husband was. Of course, my husband did, and some of my teammates did. And I was encouraged by an old friend and teammate to, hey, Tatiana's amazing. In Brazil, she's the real deal. She really knows her stuff. And I wanted nothing more than to be able to train with someone who was at my level and around my size and my strength level. Because as a female, it's just, some people go through their entire jiu-jitsu careers never having that. And but I knew that under Ricardo's banner, it was sort of a bad thing to do, to train with somebody from a different team. So, politics and trying to be loyal and doing things the right way prevented me from training with her at an earlier point in my career. But once I had severed ties with Ricardo's team and the opportunity presented itself again, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go. And when I went, I also was exploring options at other schools, because the negative experience that I had at Ricardo's team made me think, I don't want this to happen to myself again, and I don't really want this to happen to anybody else. So let me go into this a little bit more prepared. So after sussing out a few options and then sort of coming to the conclusion that I still wanted to try to compete a little bit more, I ended up joining Marcelo's team because he was still competing. It was a much more competitive environment. And Tatiana proved to be she's a very good friend of mine, and she was a wonderful training partner and coach to me as well.
What do you think makes a good instructor? What principles would you say, or not principles, but what traits would you say?
I think an instructor needs to be open-minded. And what I mean by that is I believe instructors, as much as you are interested to teach and inform, you should also be, perceptive and sort of getting feedback from your students as well. Otherwise, you end up with a cult, and you have to be able to hear the people that you're working with and see them. I think it's important for instructors to feel that they should continue to learn and that they're never above anybody. I believe I learned something from all of my students, whether they're a white belt or a black belt. They might do something differently. They might show me something about the way that I'm teaching that's effective or ineffective. I think it's important for instructors to be able to articulate themselves clearly, and that doesn't necessarily mean like a mastery of language, but it just means that as an instructor, you should have a way to be able to communicate your ideas clearly to your students so that they understand what you want them to do. You know, I think that's a big thing that's missed, because especially in jiu-jitsu, most of our instructors tend to be retired athletes or athletes that, you know, want to take a break from competition or need to support themselves. And it's important to differentiate that a high-level competitor is not a high-level instructor. Two very different things. You can be both, but you have to work at being a good instructor too. And so I think that, you know, being sensitive enough to pick up on what other people are doing is a very, very important skill. And as a high-level competitor, something very difficult to do, because everything is about you, not about everybody else, you know?
How far along were you before you started teaching? Like, was that something that you, like coming up in jiu-jitsu, you always gravitated toward? Or was it something later on you decided that maybe this is the right move for me?
Yeah, I think in jiu-jitsu, especially for females, there's not always tons of females that are running around teaching. There's actually not even a ton of us training, although that's changing, you know. I was a purple belt when I started teaching, and I think what often happens is when you are sort of the senior most female student in a school, you will often get asked to help the new female, or you'll get often asked to help the new students, because you're sort of seen as probably more of a nurturing character in the school. You have some skill, so the instructor might feel comfortable pairing you off with somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. And from there, you know, when you sort of get a critical mass of new students, maybe you get like 3 or 4 girls, somebody might think it's a brilliant idea to put all the girls together in one room and have a women's class. So I started teaching as a purple belt, and I taught a lot of different types of recreational classes and led day camps for children growing up. You know, from the age I was 14 to 24, that was something that I did. So I wasn't necessarily very nervous teaching, you know, other people. That wasn't an issue. But it was different to be put in a position of authority with jiu-jitsu, because it was something that I was still being a student at, you know? So yeah, and I consider that a very important process of being a teacher is that it's important to sometimes put yourself in the perspective of being a student as well. You know, it's important to be inspired. So yeah, it's a bit of a shift.
Do you feel like a lot of women lose? Well, I guess you kind of answered that question already. That a lot of women don't have, they don't get the experience of having like a training partner who's like their size or their.
Yeah, it's a very, I mean, it's funny. I wish I could live my jiu-jitsu career over as a man, because I think it would be very different. You know. Do
you feel like you gained anything from having to constantly fight larger or stronger?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to both sides. Right. And again, like some of this is also within the fact of, you know, where I started my practice and my generation. Yeah. So a woman who started like me in 2001 versus a woman who starts training in 2011, two totally different stories. I think a woman who starts training in 2011 will feel, it's gonna sound weird, but will feel a little bit more like a guy than I did, because you know, now it's not uncommon to go into a school with, let's say, 100 students and to see maybe like 5 to 10 ladies around. At least you have somebody in the school. Most of the time, if it's a hospitable environment. In my time, it was like there was one woman in the entire city, or like, oh my God, I saw another woman at a tournament. You know, my first tournament, there were 6 women, all different belt levels, all different weight classes. We all just got smushed together. So, you know, like when I have students that complain that they got bumped up a weight class, like 5 pounds, or they had to fight somebody, you know, that was like a belt level over them, I was like, please, give me a break. You know, like, and at the same time, there's the argument that because as females, we don't have as many equal training partners, like in terms of gender and level and size, that our jiu-jitsu is not as well developed because of that, because we haven't had as many chance encounters to push ourselves. I don't necessarily not agree with that or not believe that, because when in my day when I went to a tournament, I was lucky if I had 2 or 3 fights. Today, if you're a lot of these people, they have to fight like 4, 5, 6 times to win a gold medal. But that just wasn't, I mean, I would have done it if it was provided to me, but I couldn't. And I think also, I came up in a time where sometimes I had to fight guys. I've done it in a tournament before. And certainly almost all the jiu-jitsu I've learned has been from men, and my training partners have all been men. So yeah, it's, I think being a woman in the sport has, our experiences have definitely changed, but it's proven to I've always said, like, if you're a black belt female in jiu-jitsu now, you're incredibly resilient, and you're also a little effing crazy. Because, sometimes people are not kind, and you suffer a lot. And I certainly suffer from like old injuries and things, and some of those injuries are probably caused by stubbornness, training and doing things with a bunch of people that were maybe 50, 60, 70 pounds bigger than me, because that was the only option I had. Now when I look at the room, I can train a lot smarter for myself, but I can also look out for other students, not just females, but other students who might be smaller or injured. I think I have a little bit more perspective on those things. So,
What do you think people can do to kind of improve that dynamic between, I mean, maybe it extends past just men and women, maybe it's like larger people and smaller people when it comes to jiu-jitsu? Because like I personally, I'm used to being bigger than most of my training, or at least heavier than most of my training partners. And I would find myself kind of like, okay, like I don't want to like be a jerk and like just mush you this whole time. But I also don't want to like not give you resistance and like make this whole thing useless.
I think it's trial and error, right? Like, I just had my second child about 2.5 months ago. I started training maybe a month after I had the kid. Part of it was just I was trying to let my joints settle a little bit, and I had to get a little bit of conditioning in. And the people that I feel safer training with are not necessarily the smallest students in the room, but they are the most experienced, right? So they're the upper level belts. And I pick and choose what I'll do with them. Like some days I'm like, I don't want to work my guard because my core doesn't feel right, so I'll just work on passing. But if I have my choice between training with somebody that's like 30 pounds bigger than me, that's newer to jiu-jitsu and uses a lot of strength, versus somebody who's 60 pounds bigger than me but has been training for 7 years, I would much rather take the latter.
The bane of everyone's existence.
Yeah.
Strong white belt.
But I also think that, to be fair to the newer students, I think there's an adjustment period in the beginning where you go through what I call fight or flight. It doesn't matter whether you're a guy or a girl, 10 pounds or 1,000 pounds. You go through a period where having people touch you and learning jiu-jitsu is such a foreign experience that all you can do is freak out. Like, everybody does it because you feel threatened. So it's the only response that you have. As you learn more and you can trust your technique more and you can say, hey, I know at least one reversal and this works, you start to be able to hold on to that a little bit. And instead of just kicking your partner in your face, you can say, well, but I know this one move and let me try that. So I think as you get better, training opportunities present themselves where you are then training with people that know better, that won't threaten you in a bad way, and will work with you and give you openings to test yourself. And I think through working sort of that ebb and flow with your different training partners, someone who is, less experienced and spazzy can gain a better sense and feeling for how they should be moving versus just spazzing out all the time. You hear the term like, you just gotta beat the spaz out of them, or you just gotta, let the white belts go at it together or whatever. You don't want anybody to get injured. And also the other thing that I'll do is sometimes if I have some students that are very, don't want to say resistant, but having very challenged by the notion of toning their training down a little bit. Sometimes I will train with them in positions that I feel safe with, and I'll say, listen, time out. This is not working for you. No. And I'll say, look, this move works really well on me because you're like 50 pounds bigger, and it's easy for you to just take me with your bicep and throw me across the room. But if you do this on a guy that's your size, it's never gonna work. So you might as well eat a slice of humble pie and learn a technique that's a little bit more fluid so that you can use it on people like me and you can use it on people like yourself. And, you know, if you as a senior student or teacher don't take the opportunities to educate and build awareness amongst your students and your peers, it's like the blind leading the blind, you know? And the way I figure is if I have 15 years of experience on the mat, the least I can do is guide people when they deserve to be, you know, shown the way. So, you know, it's a little bit here, a little bit there.
Do you feel like, not a special bond, but I guess like maybe a special responsibility to kind of look out for female students? Or like to kind of, I guess, sort of like shepherd them in a way?
I don't ever want to, I don't think women are special, okay? Like, women are just like men in the sense that we're all students when we walk in the room. But I think I would be comfortable saying that I want to be every female's cheerleader, and I want to encourage them to stay, and I want to find ways to make it more enjoyable and create an environment where they can thrive versus throw them into a bull pit where they're just going to get tossed around, beat up, and be like, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, and I have learned, you know, in my years, my perspective is that men and women are different species. We learn very differently most of the time. I think women are less averse to risk, blind risk. I think women really like to educate themselves as much as possible, understand the details. And this, of course, is a generalization. There are men that do this too, but I think women as a species, we tend to like want to collect all the facts first before we go and try something. Guys, on the other hand, are just willing to jump in the pit and go, you know, like they'll rough it out, they'll play it out. And when I say I want to be every woman's cheerleader and make it a more hospitable environment, I want to give them tools to succeed. I want to make them feel like they can get it too. So I think I've adapted my teaching style to be very descriptive. Some people might think I talk too much or give too many analogies, but I want to give my students, male or female, as many tools that they can possibly have so that they can be successful at doing a technique the first or second time around versus sitting there for half an hour with smoke blowing out of their ears because they don't understand, which happens sometimes. It happened to me a lot as a blue belt. The teacher would show a move and not explain it, and then I would go try it, and I could never figure out what the heck was going on. So, yeah, so I don't have women's only classes at my school right now. I think part of that is because I have the opportunity to be a head instructor of both males and females. So I want the females that come into the room to be educated to feel that they have just as much right and opportunity to be at the head of the classroom as well, as opposed to, well, we're separate. I do run women's only camps. Part of that is so that we can provide women with the opportunity to train together, you know, and to be led by other females, which I think is also important as well. But I don't want to create a culture where in my school on a regular basis, you know, the women will separate themselves or the men will feel like they shouldn't, you know, train with the women or that everything is different. And because I've done both. I've had women's only class. And it wasn't a negative thing for the women by any means, but I think when you separate things sometimes, it's hard to make those things to like dovetail together in the future. And sometimes what I've seen is, you get a women's program going, and then sometimes the women just want to stay training with the women and they never want to mix it up with anybody else. And my education has been co-ed all the time. And I get a lot from that. So I don't ever want my students to feel like they're this way or that way, but that, we all have our differences, whatever they may be. And part of what we do in this room is learn to work together,
Do you find it hard to summarize, like, kind of what you do to people who are not martial artists?
You mean in terms of, like, what jiu-jitsu is, or?
Like, let's say, like, you bump into a, like, old friend at the supermarket or something like that. Like, oh, like, what are you up to? Like, what do you do?
No, but it's funny. Like, I think people get their notions of, like, what I do. So it's funny if I say, oh, hey, like, yeah, I stopped working in that industry and now I sort of co-own my own school. Oh, well, what do you teach? I teach Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Do you know what that is? No, I have no idea. Do you ever watch UFC, like, where they get on the ground and they, like, choke each other out and do arm bars? And they're like, oh, you do UFC? And I'm like, no, I teach the grappling aspect of it. I was like, do you know what judo is? So sometimes it requires a little bit of an explanation. Because the other option is if I say I own a martial arts school, people get like, oh, she owns a McDojo. I'm like, no. So, yeah, but that in addition to the other work that I do, the consulting work that I do, I guess I don't have a one-word answer. Like, I can't tell people I'm an accountant, and people totally understand what that is. Because I think my work is me. Like, I kind of threw myself into it on so many different levels, and I don't think I'm like a one answer kind of girl.
This is something I've noticed, like, it differs a lot from sort of gym to gym. When your students address you, do they say, like, coach? Do they say, like, professor?
Some people will come with habits from other schools, and they'll, like, even though they're here, they'll call me professor or master or whatever. At our school, myself and Art, we choose to just be addressed by our first names. I am your teacher. I don't mind if someone wants to call me coach or sensei, but I don't like to create a situation where there's a hierarchy and my students feel that they're less than me. At the end of the day, I'm a person, you're a person. It just so happens I'm more experienced at doing this one thing. You're a more experienced videographer. Do I refer to you as master? No. So I just, I apply that same philosophy to the jiu-jitsu room. I've been in environments and I've seen people where, you have to call your senior instructors professor, or you have to call your senior instructors master. I just don't really always like the connotations that come with that, especially because, with the word professor, like, there might be, or a coach, there might be a lot of academic training that's gone into that, and a choice to be that, to pursue education to that level. I think when we train jiu-jitsu, some people do not choose to pursue teaching to that level. They are just teachers because they ranked out, or they don't want to compete, or they need to make a living while they compete. So I don't know that it's necessarily so much of a choice to earn that title, And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that as instructors, that the students that come to our school are not lesser people, or, that they don't deserve to be treated as equals like us. We just happen to know more than them. So some people think that, it's wrong, that, you still know more than your students, so you should be called something else. But at our school, currently, we just call ourselves by our first names.
What would you, if you could sort of, I guess, go back in time, like, do the whole give your young self advice and such, like, what would you tell yourself before you were to embark on this journey of jiu-jitsu?
This is a difficult question. That's a really tough question. I have a lot of things that I've learned over the last number of years, and I can't say that I regret anything that I've learned the hard way. one of the things would probably be to be nicer to myself physically if I was injured, to take care of my injuries versus just beating myself up. I mean, when you're really excited about training as a white belt or a blue belt or a purple belt, whatever level you are, sometimes you think that if you don't go to your 7th class of the week, that the like amazing secret jiu-jitsu technique of the world and the universe will be taught that day. And if you're hobbling around because your knee got busted the week before and you should really just like take a rest, you'll still drag yourself into class and put yourself at more risk because you're like, but they might teach that special move today. So I think I abused my body way too much in the name of pride and ego because I wanted to know more and learn more and be better, right? The other thing is, I don't know. I mean, I think with the unfortunate circumstance I had politically with Ricardo's, I don't know that I would have done things differently because I went into that situation fully trusting and believing that I was going to be in a good environment. And actually, I guess what I would tell myself is just educate myself a little bit more and know that there's more than one option. So, you know, knowing when I go into one place that maybe I should check out another one to make sure that the culture fits me. Because a lot of times as students, we walk into the first place and we think that this is it. This is what it's supposed to be. And you don't realize that the school down the street might have a better fit for you. Some schools that you walk into will be very heavily into sort of, you know, MMA training, or like the guys, it'll be sort of like a younger crew of like heavy guys, versus the school down the street might be like just all jiu-jitsu in the gi, and the people might be a little bit more family oriented. There's so many different cultures that you can be a part of, and I think that's something that I was a little bit blind to. It could have also just been a sign of the times. There's a lot more options now as well. Whereas in before, it was like, if you didn't train here, you had to drive like an hour and a half somewhere else. Yeah, I mean, I've always tried to trust the people that teach me and that are my teammates. And I guess sometimes you just get burned, you know? It's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think I really did anything wrong, but yeah, so yeah, there's not too much that I would tell myself, because I think if I were to change too much about my past, I wouldn't know what I know today. And what I know today, I think is great. In the circumstance that I own my own school, I run camps, and in many ways I have other people in the community that reach out to me with their own issues. And I think because of my experience, I'm in a better position to try to help.